Alright, lesson 112. This is a pretty good lesson here. A lot of good stuff in this chapter. We're going to talk about three things in particular. Switches, that's going to be the biggest part of this. NEMA devices, which we'll get into. That's a fairly simple thing, but an important thing to know. And then conductor identification. This is very important to know, very important to have keep straight in your head. So let's start with switches. So there's four types I want to focus on here. First one is what's called a single pole, single throw. Next one, single pole, double throw. Double pole, double throw, and then finally double pole, single throw. So let's kind of go through these and look at what the difference is, what we use them for. So let's look at the single pole, single throw here first. Abbreviated SPST, that's simple enough to understand where that comes from. More commonly, we're just going to refer to that as a simple single pole switch, just single pole. If somebody says single pole, they're talking about a single pole, single throw. It has two screws for connections of wires. That's not including ground wires. We're leaving the ground out of it. So we're going to have two screws for current carrying conductors, and there's going to be one for ground, but that's implied. We won't mention that. So we have two screws on the single pole switch, and it has a definitive on-off position. Okay, and when we look at the diagrams, that'll make a little more sense. But the handle itself is actually going to be marked with on and off because there is a definite on and off on this type of switch. We would use this switch to control a light or a load from one location only. That's all we can do. Okay, we'll have some diagrams coming up. So going on to single pole double throw, again abbreviated SPDT. That's more commonly known as a three-way switch. You guys have probably dealt with these, and nobody calls it a single pole double throw. Everybody calls it a three-way switch. One thing to sort of keep it straight in your head is this three-way switch has three screws. It's a little deceiving because the switch can only be turned two ways. I think it more accurately would be called a two-way switch, but it's called a three-way switch. A three-way switch has three screws for conductors. And the switch is not going to have an on and an off position. Instead, it's going to have more of an either or selection. Again, the diagrams will clear that up, I think. But next up and before we move on, the three-way switch will be used to control a light from two locations. So if we need two switches to control one light or one load, we're going to need two three-way switches. Okay, so on to the double pole, double throw. Again, this name is deceiving there because everybody in the trade calls it a four-way switch. And again, the four-way switch has, you might have guessed, four screws. So it's a nice, easy, quick check to tell what's what, right? And again, this does not have a definitive on-off position. The handle will not be marked with on and off. Again, instead we have this sort of either-or functionality. And we would use the four-way switch if we need to control a switch from more than two locations. So for two locations, we need two three-way switches. Then for each additional location after that, we need to add a four-way switch. So to control a light from three locations, I need two three-way switches, one four-way switch, and then just add four ways as we go on. And again, we'll look at a schematic and sort of show how all that works. The last one we want to mention is our double pole single throw switch. Okay, this is least common. It's very commonly just called a double pole switch. So if you hear somebody say double pole switch, odds are they're talking about a double pole single throw, right? Now the double pole single throw actually has four screws on it as well, just like the double pole double throw over here. But really the only physical difference is the double pole single throw has a definitive on-off position, so the handle will be marked with on and off. So it's a nice quick check in the field to make sure, hey, am I actually dealing with a four-way switch here, or am I actually dealing with a double pole switch? Well, do we have an on-off? If so, it's a double pole. If not, it's a four-way. And four-ways are far more common than the double pole. And I just want to look at some trends here too. So notice anything that was a single throw switch, so this first one, this last one, they're the only ones that have a definitive on-off position. All right, nice little trick there. Anything that's double throw, we don't have that definitive on-off. So let's jump to the next slide here and look at actually some connections and some diagrams for these guys. So same switches here. So what do our connections look like on a single pole? Well, as we should remember, we have two screws for connections of wires. So it's basically either on or off. It opens or closes this connection, right? And that's why we have that definitive on-off position there, right? And then from a schematic point of view, this represents the transformer windings. But anyway, so your conductor, your electricity is going to flow through here, hit the first terminal, through the closure, through the next terminal, and onto the load. The light is on, or if we turn it off or open the switch, the light is off, right? About as simple as we can get with switching here, right? Next up, we have our single pole double throw, otherwise known as that three-way switch. And notice we don't have an off or an on. It's either this connected to the top screw or the up position, or this as the bottom screw or down position. And notice we have, they mark it as C, or the common screw. That's the screw that we kind of hinge on, right? So it'll always be connected to the common screw. Then these over here, we'll start to call those your traveler screws, and we'll talk about that momentarily too. And I don't want you to spend a ton of time on these diagrams. I have an animation later that I think will explain it. And all this comes from your textbook too, but here's a nice diagram of your three-way switches in any of the switch combinations. Notice the light is each time you flip the switch, going to turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off, so on. So jump into our double pole, double throw, or the four-way switch. Again, we don't have an on and an off. We have an either and an or scenario here. And this diagram doesn't look much different than the three-way diagram, with the exception of we've added these four ways in the middle. And that's all you're going to do. You can do that to an infinite number. You can have as many four ways in the middle as you want. So again, they want to control this light from three locations. We have 1, 2, 3 ways, and then we have 1 4-way in the middle. And then last, I'm not going to put too much emphasis on this guy because it's not very common, but here's your double pole single throw. Notice this does have a definitive on-off position. Once again, it's on or it's off. And we would use this to control a 2-pole load, so something that's 208 volt or 240 volt, or maybe 2 single pole loads at once. But mostly you could think of like an electric heating element that's run at 240. We would want to disconnect both hots. We would use this type of a switch. Alright, so we've got some animations here I think are going to clear some of this up. So here we see basically a panel. We have our hot wire coming out connected to a single pole switch. It's going to go through the light over here. And then here we have our neutral wire coming back. And we show a wire nut here sort of for clarity, because again, you're going to run a 2-wire into the switch box. This hot connects to the switch. The 2-wire going out of the switch box, the hot connects to the switch, and then we simply wire nut the white wire through. So let's sort of look at how this works with the switch in this position. Nothing happens. The switch is off. Electron flow stops at the end of this switch here, right? If we turn that switch on, however, we can now see that current flows all the way through and the light lights. Okay, simple as that, right? Now let's get a little more complicated. Look at our single pole double throw, otherwise known as 3-way switches, right? So, again, we have our one switch here, second switch here. Notice it's very important to remember the common screw or the common wire. It's all on modern day switches anyway. It's always going to be a different color than the other two switches. Some older ones, they didn't mark it that way. It's a little confusing, but modern switches, it's always going to be marked a different color. And something else I want to point out here, when you're hooking up your 3-way switches, you want one of these common wires to be the hot coming in. You want the other common screw to be the hot wire going to the light. As long as you do that, just connect the other 2 wires. You really can't go wrong, but you got to keep that in your head. We want the hot coming in to be one common, the hot going out to the light to be the other common. And we would actually call these wires in between travelers. Okay, and that's why I mentioned these. I refer to these as our traveler screws. So what we've done here, we've run a 2-wire from the panel, a white and a black, into this switch box. Then we're going to run a 3-wire, a black, red, and white, between this 3-way and that 3-way. Then we're going to run a 2-wire from this 3-way up to our light. Again, all we're doing with the neutrals is wire nutting them straight through all the way. We're never going to switch a neutral. I shouldn't say never, but almost always, never are you going to switch a neutral. And then we, as I said, make sure one hot coming in is connected to your common screw. The other hot going out to your light is connected to the other common screw. Wire nut your neutrals through, and then whatever you're left with, land on your traveler screws. You really can't go wrong. The book does a great job of a bunch of different variations of this, so spend some time checking those out. So let's go ahead and look at if we turn the breaker on and let current flow. Notice we have a complete path and our light will light. And the idea is no matter which switch we turn, the light should go to the opposite of whatever it is. So we turn this switch, for instance, our light now should be off, and it is because current flow stops here. Now let's come back and actually flip this switch, and notice, no surprise there, the light turns on. Right? And let's kind of complete the cycle here, and we flip this switch and our light is now off once again. So again, no matter which combination, which switch you throw, your light should always change. If that's not the case, the most common mistake is you have one of your traveler wires landed on your common screw. That's 99.9% of the time when there's a mistake in three-way wiring. That's it. So let's kind of add one more piece to this, the double pole, double throw, otherwise known as four-way switches. So don't let this overwhelm you. All that's different is we've added this. This is our four-way switch. Other than that, if we take this out of the mix, it's the same exact connection as our three-way switches. So we're going to run a three-wire between the three-way and the four-way, another three-wire from the four-way to the second three-way. And again, tie your neutral straight through. Land your travelers on the pairs of screws on the four-way, and let's see what happens here, right? So in this case, our light is lit. We're going to come back and flip this switch, and notice now our light is not lit because current flow stops here. Again, the idea, no matter which combination of switch throws you do, the light changes state. So we'll flip the middle one. Notice that kind of has that crossover action there. But let's look and see what current flow looks like. Of course, we got a complete path, and the light will light. Let's come back now and flip this guy, and should be no surprise by now. Light is off. We'll just kind of complete the cycle here and go through. And no matter which combination of switch throws we do, the light always changes. So, enough on switches for now. We could talk about that one all day, but I want to hit a couple things really quick here. NEMA devices. You're going to hear different receptacles and plugs called by NEMA ratings. And here's an example of one would be an L15-30P. We could have an L15-20R. All these letters and numbers have a meaning here. And let's decipher that. So in red we have the first letter, the L. Basically we can have an L or we'll have nothing. If we have an L, it means it's locking or twist lock. If we have nothing, if it starts just with the number, it means it's straight blade. Okay, so here's your straight blade, here's your locking or your twist lock. Your next number, I don't necessarily need you to be able to determine what that number is and then tell me what the receptacle is. There's a ton of combinations here, as you can see, and this isn't even all of them. But basically that number means what configuration the plug is. The voltage, how many poles, do we have a neutral or not. And there is a rhyme and reason to it, but it's a lot to memorize. What I really need you guys to know is it represents voltage, number of poles, and number of wires. Then we're always going to have a dash after the first number. Second number, quite simply, is amperage. So this example is a 30 amp plug. If it said 15, it would be a 15 amp plug. Plain and simple. Okay, and then our last number here is in this case it's a letter P, but it could be a P, it could be a C, or it could be an R. P is plug or a male cord end, C is connector or female cord end, and then R is receptacle. That would be an item that actually fastens in the wall or in a box. So we have P for plug, C for connector, and then R for receptacle. So that's your NEMA designation there. You're going to see people throw out a NEMA number on a receptacle. That's what you have. That's what they mean. So one last thing here we want to talk about is conductor identification or coloring. So ungrounded conductor, grounded conductor, and grounded conductor. Ungrounded means hot. Grounded is going to be neutral, and then grounding will be an actual ground wire. Notice the colors, right? Ground wire can be green or green with a yellow stripe, or bare. Ground is white or gray, and basically hot can be anything else. get familiar with these names here, or I'm sorry, these names here. You're going to see these referred to a lot by these names.